Good evening, everyone. I am Denise Tomkowski, the Town Administrator, and I would like to welcome everyone here tonight. We are excited to share some information and updates into the master planning efforts that are taking place for the North Course of Stow Acres. Here with us this evening is our consultants BSC group. We do have a lot to cover, so we're going to get started with some quick introductions, and then we will get on with our presentation. I'll turn it over to Kathy to introduce the Conservation Department, then we'll move on to the Planning Department and Recreation if anyone is here from there. So Kathy?
Thanks, Denise. I'm Kathy Spera. I'm the Conservation Director and have been involved with this effort from the outset. And I'll also introduce Jackie Goring, who is the Conservation Assistant in our office.
Hello. Thank you.
Valerie?
I'm Valerie Ortiz. I'm the Planning Director in Stow, and I'll pass it to Michael.
Hi there, Michael Slagle, Land Use Planner, Town of Stow.
And I don't see Laura here, so why don't we start with Pallavi at BSC?
Great. Thanks, Denise. I'm Pallavi Mande. I'm the Director of Climate Resilient Design at BSC Group, and I'm your project manager. I'll pass it on to Casey Lee.
Hello, landscape architect and habitat designer, also playground safety inspector, but yeah, working on what you might do with your sites. Matt?
I'm Matt Byrne. I'm a senior ecologist with BSC Group, and I am taking a look at the natural resources that we can find on the site and how that's going to inform what Casey Lee works on. Yeah.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kat, and I'm on BSC's Climate Resilience team, and I will pass it to Aksa.
My name is Aksa. I'm a new planner at BSC Group, and I'm here to take notes.
Great. I think Pallavi, I think you're going to kick us off, or Kathy? Which one? Who's kicking us off now?
I think Kathy is, so I'm just going to share my screen.
Kat's going to do a quick poll first, I think, right? Because we wanted to ask who else was here. No?
Yes.
Okay.
Can you see it? Oh, okay, good.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to do a little bit of an introduction. As many of you know, the town and others have been working together since 2019 to protect the majority of Stow Acres and provide for some of the town's future open space, recreation, and housing needs on the property. And so what we wanted to do is just take a few minutes tonight to do a quick refresher on what we've done over the last 3 years and explain the current master planning effort. Next slide. So although the current Stow Acres initiative began in 2019 formally, the reality is that for many years, Stow residents have been concerned about the future of Stow Acres. It's our largest golf course, and changes in ownership and the profitability of golf had increased uncertainty about future use and development at Stow Acres. The property had long been identified as a very high priority in the Stow Open Space and Recreation Plan because of its size and its potential developability. And it also had important significance as the former Mapledale Country Club, one of the first Black-owned country clubs in the United States. We knew what development under zoning would mean for the land, and we also knew that the property was worth in the vicinity of 15 to 20 million, which would make it out of reach financially for outright town purchase. So over the years, the town had kept lines of communication open with the ownership of Stow Acres. And in 2019, we had a series of meetings with them where it became clear that they were thinking much more seriously about selling the property and that they were engaged in conversations with various owners or various options, including over 55 development, including high density 40B development, and even a large regional scale nursery operation. So we were increasingly concerned about what might happen there. Next slide. Can I do the next slide? Uh-oh. Olivia, can you advance the slides? There we go. Thank you. So in early 2020, we began talking seriously with our local land trust, the Stow Conservation Trust, about using a combination of town funds and SCT funds to work proactively and hire a professional land planning firm to develop a future vision for the property. We contracted with Dodson and Flinker out of Northampton, and we invited Stow Acres ownership and a local developer with whom they had been negotiating at the time to participate in the effort. We agreed early on 4 what I would say goals of the partnership that united us. Those were to develop a comprehensive unified vision for the entire property, to reach agreement on financial terms that work for all of us, to avoid piecemeal development, and to advance the town's open space, recreation, and housing goals on the property. If you were here then, you know that we were doing all of this during COVID and learning how to run Zoom meetings for the first time, with numerous public meetings during that time period to report on the effort and to get public comment on the concept plans as they evolved. We ultimately decided to break the project into 2 phases that were focused on the South Course and the North Course respectively, and brought those to town meeting votes in May and October of 2021, with both votes receiving overwhelming positive approval. Next slide. This was the 2-phase concept plan that was publicly presented and which became the basis for the 2 town meeting votes. The first and less complicated of the phases was the South Course, shown here in yellow, which we had agreed would stay in continued golf use by Stow Acres, but be permanently protected by a conservation restriction, which would essentially remove the development rights from the property, the 151-acre property there. The town voted to use 1.5 million in existing CPA funds on hand to purchase the restriction, which also included a public trail easement. The second phase was to purchase approximately 2/3 of the North Course, shown here in blue, for conservation and recreation purposes, with Stow Acres retaining the rights to continue to operate a golf course on 9 of the 18 holes for up to 10 years, and to operate the driving range for up to 5 years. The town paid $3.5 million in CPA funds to purchase the land and received nearly $1 million from the state toward the purchase, as well as some funding from Stow Conservation Trust. The remainder of the red course, which is shown here in red, was envisioned to be developed for mixed income housing by a private developer, and we worked together on the design and layout of that development to meet the town's housing needs and integrate it with the rest of the property. Next slide. So that was 2021, and here's where we are today. The South Course Conservation Restriction has been completed and recorded. It is currently co-held by the Stow Conservation Commission and the Stow Conservation Trust, and the town has constructed about a 2.5-mile walking trail around the perimeter of the property called the Mapledale Trail in honor of the former country club at the site. Next slide. The acquisition of land at the North Course was completed in January of this year, with the land divided between the Conservation Commission and the Recreation Commission's ownership, and a memorandum of agreement between the 2 boards and departments that future use of the site would be determined by the master planning process that we're discussing tonight. Next slide. And the developer is completing plans for the housing development portion of the site and will be submitting these for permitting this fall. The plans are essentially the same as what was discussed publicly back in 2020 and 2021, and will be the subject of future public hearings before the Zoning Board of Appeals and the Conservation Commission. Next slide. So with the acquisition and protection phases of the project complete, we are now turning to development of a plan for the use of the North Course land that's owned by the town. The planning effort is being funded by a grant from the Commonwealth's Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Program, which also helped fund acquisition of the land. And it will look at ways to enhance the climate resiliency of the property, connect it with surrounding neighborhoods, and create open space and recreation opportunities for Stow and beyond. The town has hired BSC Group to assist with the development of the master plan, and we will be doing extensive public outreach, of which this forum is really the first part, with completion of the plan expected in June of 2024. And I want to acknowledge that Michelle Roden from EOEA's Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Program is here with us tonight. Next slide. The master plan is expected to include an analysis of the site's natural resources and other features, and it will also look at issues like access, parking, creation of community gathering spaces, habitat restoration, and various conservation and recreation related uses on the property. It will also provide cost estimates and phasing recommendations. I like to think of the master plan really as a blueprint for the site, which can be referred to over the next 10 to 15 years to guide the layout and development of facilities and activities on the site. Next slide. At this point, we know that the driving range shown here will be relocated by Stow Acres to the south course, and the town will look to restore this area to functional wetland and continue to use the existing parking area as a trailhead and overlook. Next slide. And the remainder of the land is a little bit of a blank canvas. It is dotted with ponds and woodlands and open areas, as you can see in this slide. The property is quite large and quite beautiful, and it really just awaits our collective creativity and imagination. So you will hear some of the consultant teams thinking on what we might do with some of this land tonight. Next slide. To close out my portion of the presentation tonight, I wanted to note that the master planning process is broken into 3 phases. We are just transitioning now from the site analysis phase to the public outreach phase, and really want to learn from you what you would like to see on the site. The public outreach phase starts tonight. We will also be launching an online survey this week. We will be holding some additional forums and site visits. And we are also sponsoring, I think as most people know, a fall festival at the end of the month, which will really give people a chance to get out on the property and learn a little bit more about it. Last slide. And all of what we are learning, all of the information that's being developed by the consultants, tonight's slide presentation, the Zoom recordings, everything that we have is essentially going to be posted on a dedicated page of the town's website that can be accessed right from the homepage, with a link that will take you to a dedicated Stow Acres page where you can find information about the past planning effort. You can find photographs, information about the development permitting, and information about the master plan. And that will remain up for the duration of this project. So that's what I have for tonight, and I will turn it back to our consulting team.
Great. Thank you, Kathy. Before I start describing the existing conditions and the documentation that we did, I do want to thank our working group that has been really helpful in both addressing, issues in terms of what we've noticed on the site and collaborating with us in terms of getting all the information together, but also acting as a board that can really help us bounce off ideas that you'll hear about in a few slides. So just wanted to acknowledge that. So as you can see, these are essentially pictures of special kind of nodes or places or landscape types that we documented while we were on the site. As those of you who've been there know it's a large site, and it kind of takes a while to at least get familiar with the different sections. But from our standpoint, we wanted to first identify all the elements that were very intrinsic to the way the landscape works on the site, the connection between the hydrology of the site and the topography, at least acknowledge the different features that are being formed. And you see the some of them called out: the dog-bone pond, the canal margins, the driving range that Kathy already talked about, and the trail canal, etc. It's important to call these out because we've basically looked at the existing infrastructure, if I may call that, of the natural fabric of the site as the armature, which helps us develop what our restoration strategy is going to be. So we want to make sure that we are both acknowledging and reinforcing what we are seeing in terms of the natural landscape of the site, and areas that have been altered over the course of the last development of the golf course, we can restore, because that is one big part of our strategy, not only to conserve the existing resources that are performing their ecological function, but also restore natural hydrology on the site, as well as other ecological habitat features. A few more, just to give you a sense of the variability that we've noticed on the site. Everything from the more actively managed sections of the landscape versus those that have sort of organically grown and would possibly be easier to restore since they're already sort of in that state of being managed without human intervention. But the idea is, we want this space to be very much managed with least amount of sort of artificial means. And if we can make these ecological systems sustainable, that's what we're trying to go for. So one of the very important first pieces of analysis that we've done is looked at the historical mapping of this area. This is the first kind of graphic that we found dated back to 1952. And the way you can see the connection between the two graphics is looking at the water feature that occurs in both of those. And interestingly, if you notice on the graphic on the left, the marsh or the tidal marshland is very clearly delineated, and it's a little more difficult to follow that outline when you're looking at the aerial photo, but it is very easy to sort of get the connection between how this landscape was back in 1952 or before. And you'll hear from Matt when he gives the presentation on the natural resource inventory. We actually have data from geologic evolution of this piece of site, which really does explain how the water features got formulated and how the site has changed over time. This is another set of maps that we found, again, showing how the wetland system has been modified and potentially also indicates the way it can be restored over time. So the graphic on the left shows what existed in 1968, and having a way to replicate that graphic on the existing conditions today, you can see that There are features that are still very much present in the landscape, but then others that have been modulated or artificially managed to serve the function of the golf course that gives us the opportunity for restoration. So this just kind of gives a little better sense or a zoomed in view of the wetland system that hydrologically is still intact, but you can, it's not easy to see how the water moves unless you are essentially following the hydrology of the site and understanding some sections that are underground kind of being restored through groundwater levels, and other pieces of the system that are above ground and show a very distinct connection between the different places where we've seen the wetland appear. These are just more pictures of the driving range that Kathy already talked about. As you can see, depending on the weather, or if you've had a rainfall event, the water does kind of move around on the site, but it's pretty easy to determine the area that was essentially wet, that was over time converted into the driving range. So it's almost like the wetland is trying to emerge back. These are other sections of the same driving range area, but showing kind of more distinctly appearing features, like the ditch that you see, which kind of is a continuous canal that connects the different parts of this wetland system. As you can see on the image on the right bottom, the pipe connection is what conveys the water underground, but it does connect the two pieces of water features with each other. So we kind of are seeing some of this infrastructure be above ground and visible, and other pieces that are underground, but still very much functional. Another set of examples where you can see in a different season along the site, you can see these features change, whether you're seeing the site after a snow melt or after intense rain. You can see much more flow in these systems, whereas during the summertime, if we haven't had much precipitation, they run kind of drier or have less flow going through it. So I'll hand this over now to Matt, who can literally run us through the different species types that were encountered and identified, as well as other topographical features, and kind of get more into the ecological functionality of the site. And hopefully that and what Casey Lee presents after, you can see the connection of when I talked about the natural infrastructure acting as a armature for our restoration ideas. So over to you, Matt.
Thank you. And so, of course, one of the first things that we have to do coming into this project before we can start thinking about what we might recommend for restoration, resilience, building opportunities, and so forth, is to really get to know the site. And so that there are kind of two primary components to our initial natural resource inventory for a project like this. And that is desktop review of all the material we can collect from the town of Stow and its partners, which is, folks here on this call, and publicly available geographic information systems data. And then, of course, whatever we can do on the ground. And as ecologists, we all want to be outside most of the time. And unfortunately, we don't get to do as much on the ground work as we'd like. But but that sort of forms the basis of the understanding that we bring to a project at the front end of it. So if we could go to the next slide. Historic maps, current mapping, these are sort of key bits of information that we build off of. The USGS topographic maps are wonderful because they are very precise and provide a lot of information at a large scale. But one of the fascinating things about USGS mapping is that it goes back in time. Every decade or so, they get updated and they go back into the middle 1800s. So we can look at a particular site from the middle 1800s on to current time, and that we take that opportunity to plot our site, the north course, and look at its progression through time. And of course, the other thing, if we go to the next slide, there is historical aerial photography that we rely on pretty heavily for this sort of work to understand what came before, when major changes happened in the landscape. And this 1965 aerial photograph of the site demonstrates sort of the moment that the course is being built, and transitioning from a partially forested and partially open agriculture landscape to a managed golf course. And so that really gave us a sort of set the moment in which we can think about, what were conditions before the golf course management and what came after, so that we can think about restoring hydrological function on the landscape to conditions that may have been present prior to 1965. And so this is all always fun and interesting information to dig into. Go to the next slide, please. Soils information is sometimes a little dizzying if you're not familiar with looking at these maps, but it is fascinating and very informative. Most of the site is in prime agricultural soils, and then, as we might suspect from what we know about the driving range and the areas just immediately to the west of the driving range, is we find Freetown muck and Swansea wetland soils and so forth. So that's always very valuable information that we turn to. Go to the next slide, please. We do have the benefit of some recent on the ground wetland delineations that we brought into our analysis. This includes wetlands that were delineated around the driving range, as imperfect as they may have been at the time, but that's all good information. And then the housing development parcel has gone through the exercise of delineating all its wetlands, so we were able to take those into consideration as well. We go to the next slide, please. And then one thing that's really valuable in any kind of exercise, thinking about ecological functions and climate resiliency, the context at a much larger scale, at the sort of townwide scale or larger landscape scales, becomes very critical, because we can think about things that we can do now and in the sort of short and near term or medium term that will create benefit for much longer term climate resiliency. So this is a look at some TNC data that evaluates resiliency of different part of the land, and we can look at how our site scores for climate resiliency and just for general ecological resiliency, and see areas in close proximity that score quite well for resiliency, and think about ways that we can make connections as we improve the conditions on the Stow Acres parcel. We're thinking about the landscape scale connections that we can work toward over time. And next, please. And then, thankfully, we do get to get out in the field a little bit. We've conducted a comprehensive invasive plant inventory for the North Chorus. And we've spent a fair bit of time getting familiar with the site, as Pallavi was mentioning, getting to know the wetland resources and the flow of water around the site and different ponds and drier areas and so on and so forth. So if we go to the next slide, please. As you've seen, we've started to really get a handle on some features of the site that we can think about improving, enhancing, changing. The driving range is sort of top on most minds and maybe the lowest hanging fruit among many ideas that you'll hear tonight. So that's something that we're thinking about. The next, please. The invasive plant inventory we've completed the mapping, and we're just kind of going through quality assurance work on it, and we'll the design of the product that you'll be able to use and operate from. This is an online data viewer that has all of the different species that we've encountered on the site and measures of density and size of infestation and so forth. And we'll provide, as part of this project, we'll provide management strategies for dealing with these. And next, please. We've pulled the whole thing together into an online data viewer that the project team will have access to, and it'll be available to the public to go in and look at these data on your own and ask questions of this landscape and think about things in other ways that we might not be thinking of. But these tools allow a fairly sophisticated way to interact with all this geographic information that we've assembled. Next. Finally, one thing that I'm pretty excited about are thinking about ways to engage the general public in development of the on-the-ground information that we know about the site. And the use of iNaturalist is something that I play with a fair bit, and it's a neat smartphone app that you can use to document and find out about just about any organism that you might encounter in your life. It's kind of cool. You take a photograph of anything, whether you know it or you don't know it, and the app will provide a suggestion for what it is that you found, and you can post that to the iNaturalist community, and over time get people to confirm what you found. And that creates a long-term georeferenced record of any observation that's submitted within an area that we define. So we'll define a project around Stow Acres, and going forward, anybody that is out on a walk and submits a photograph will become part of that record of our knowledge of what's occurring here. And that'll help us long-term grow the understanding of what organisms are found out here, and also let us, it'll be a good way to monitor how our management of the site long-term plays out for different species. So it's an exciting tool, and it's a fun way to interact with a place. And I think I have one final slide, if I remember correctly. Yeah, just, you know, as we go along, as this grows, the database just grows and grows for Stow acres, and long term, it's a great way to look at the occurrence of organisms, plants, animals, fungi, and so forth, that might be encountered out there. And with that, I'll turn it over, I think, to Casey Lee at this point.
Hey, yeah, that's us. Okay. Big site, lots of complicated areas. I'm going to walk you through them, but we're going to frame those relative to their context. So you'll see sort of in the left-hand side, forest influences, we have fairly stable long-term communities. So we've got species that can be native species that can be migrating in from that end, as well as soil hydrology and pieces from the north and the west. And then on the right-hand side, there's going to be a bunch of disturbance for development. There's the golf course, so things are more mowed and cleared. And if you paid close attention to that invasive species map, you'll also see that the invasive species were at a higher density over on this side. So that'll frame kind of what we're doing. And because there's no way to organize it in a linear way, I've given some numbers around the edge so you can see sort of the order in which I'll be moving around the site as I talk about different pieces. So let's do that next slide. There we go. Okay. And relative to that orientation I gave before, down in the bottom corner is a little aerial with an X kind of showing about where, in case you want to follow along as to what sites. But one of the spots we saw here, this is the little peninsula that sticks out into the wetlands, has been filled in. And one of the ideas we had for what you could do with something like that is to dig out the gap between it and turn it into a rookery. So islands in a wetland or in a pond are really good habitat. There are some things that like to nest in these more protected spaces. The other benefit is that they have lots of edge space. The ratio of edge makes a nice transition and allows species to fluctuate from year to year as water levels change. Next. Okay, moving up that edge, we've still got that fairly strong wetland and evergreen piece. So a type of forest that we might try and establish here, thinking of spruce bog. Again, because this is the furthest out, where it will be the hardest to come out and maintain it, but an evergreen forest has lots of shade, which makes it easier to transition over. You can see an example of a spruce bog if you go up to Crystal Lake in Devons. So some of the things we would have to do is shift the pH and make some tweaks for the hydrology, but this would be a process of expedited succession. If we were to just let this go fallow, it would take thousands of years, but it might actually turn itself into a spruce bog eventually. We'll be speeding up that process by bringing the species in early and making some of the tweaks. Next slide. Okay, passing through the middle. Now, this is kind of the high point between the site. Everything south of here, down through, drains down through the golf course and eventually gets out to the Assabet River. And anything north of here goes over and down to Elizabeth Brook. But in the center, there's a portion that they had sort of laid fallow already. someone hadn't been mowing it, but this might be a wide enough, dry enough, high enough spot to start flipping over and doing a portion of meadow. So low-hanging fruit to just seed it. Next. Okay. Further up around that corner, we are in the vicinity of Cedar Pond, and you can see up on the left just how dark and full our forest is. We're near a vernal pool as well. This might be an opportunity to do a cedar swamp. Down in the bottom corner, the blue tubes you're seeing there is a site in Connecticut where we went in and planted a cedar swamp in an area that had been cleared for other forestry. But eventually these become deep and dark and rich. So some interesting things for recreation, but taking advantage of how the site works. Next. A little further around that edge, things get drier again, and there are all these great rocks and a couple of fallen trees, and thinking about spaces like this that have ecology as their focus, we always kind of want to come in and play with things. So maybe we make a space that's designated so it's okay to move some sticks and rocks around. And this will tie into some of the other recreational opportunities later. Next. Okay. This is the far upper corner, and this is slated to be part of the housing development, but they're going to need this space to do their stormwater treatment and drainage. This is also the edge of the beaver dam down there in the center. You see the beaver dam. So they'll also want reasonable control of flows and water coming in and out. So if we allow the beaver dam to remain functional, give it a beaver deceiver so it can't get too much bigger, and then some of the best species for that stormwater cleanup are also some of the best species for beaver forage, are willows and alders, all things that stay manageable sizes, and it can be a balance between us and nature. So they'll do some of the clearing and management for us if we make that change. Next. Okay. Now out around, this is the isolated dog bone pond, and it's dog bone because it's shaped like a dog bone from the sky, but that means it has lots and lots of edge, and edge can be terrific for aquatic species. So as something that balances ecology and recreation, maybe making a fishing pond here. So that might mean a little bit of dredge to make sure there's a very deep portion for overwintering, and turning some of the Gulf greens into a wetland estuary. That down in the bottom center is a wetland estuary we did in Carver, I think. Next. These are in the middle because I couldn't think of where to put them specifically, because throughout the whole site are trails. And while we might have the initial thought of, oh, ecology, let's rip out all of the asphalt, that's a whole bunch of cost and effort. Maybe we leave that in place and make it the access so we can get in and maintain things. And all along this, we do education. So one of the things we do are audio QR trail markers, and there's my wife testing one for me. So you click it up on your phone and it'll tell you a little piece about the type of landscape you're in, so that the wetland becomes, you know, not just that muddy spot with the bugs. It's, oh, that's essential to my health and safety. And then bring in student groups and volunteer groups. Over on the right is my STEM class down doing a riparian restoration, pulling out Phragmites and doing plantings. So leveraging your community and leveraging the space as eco-recreation. Next. Going along with that, you've got a lot of ground to convert. It's going to take time and people and energy and effort. What are some of the things while it's in that successional process of growing in that you can do with it that may help to bring people to the site, to educate them, but also raise some funds? Disc golf sort of follows along trails and then has a couple little clearings where you throw things in, but it doesn't take the type of maintenance that a golf course does. Maybe you can tie to the golf course for managing and billing that out. So ideas. Next. Similar to that, sort of this upper central portion, there wasn't anything really special about it. Its most likely successional step will be into a predominantly pine forest relative to the seed bank that's going to be dropping here. So as we manage that and keep it from turning into a fire hazard, what are we going to do with the space? You have a day program for kids in town. These could be day camp areas. So work out some different activity areas and event spaces through that forest. Next. Related to that, but also related to the community as a whole, you get towards the center, and this is one of those areas that we will have to do a little more intensive management because it is open and because it has some of those anthropic influences coming at it. But how about a food forest? Right down the center here, there were some terrific thickets of mature hazelnut while we were there, and I was pulling chanterelles and picking blackberries. It's terrific. You guys can add on to that with a couple of events and plantings and get a good food forest, and it'll be close to the recreational areas and close to the homes. Next. Again, this is sort of throughout, but had to stick it in somewhere, is what do we do about the portions of waterway here that have been sort of channelized? You can see the incised bank on the bottom, but there are also areas where it isn't necessarily all treed up. So there could be spaces where we can cut those banks back a little bit to get terraces or levels, transitions that make for better species flow between river, wetland, and upland. And on the right-hand side in its example, this is the Assabet River right downtown, and it had been all retaining walls. So it doesn't look particularly spectacular, but this is a way better system of ecology for a river than what it had before with big cutoff banks. Next. Then we get back to the driving range. And the driving range is already itching to turn itself back into a wetland. My fear with this is that walking that perimeter, there was a whole bunch of glossy buckthorn and other things that will want to march in here and make a poor wetland. So this will be a matter of maintenance around the edges, seeding in some interesting wetland species, and maybe making some little access adventure pieces with overlooks to look into the maple swamp on the far side, or just elevated areas like the one on the bottom right corner. This is one of mine, overlook at the Blackstone River, looking down into their riparian wetland. So different ways to make that into both a habitat restoration and a feature. Next. Hopping over the other side is the irrigation pond. This is actually pretty big. Look at the tiny little people in the pond top center. And it's got a pump house, it's got 3-phase power. Maybe you don't take out all of the infrastructure right away. You could turn this into something like a swimming hole. So dress and pave out portions and then run the pump so that it is a wetland filtered piece. So construct wetlands where there's lawn now. Maybe expand it, maybe not. That bottom right corner is one where I have a polishing pond where stormwater that's been cleaned goes through and gets the aerating fountain and other things before it goes into recreational space. Next. And just below this, we start to get into something like a savanna. There are already some trees out here. It's got a nice lawn. But what if we amped that up for habitat? Pollinators and birds in particular, many of them prefer a savanna landscape, like indigenous landscapes where ground cover is managed. Some of our trees get to be fully open grown where they can produce more sugars, excess seed, so you get better fruit, flower, seeds for those sort of things, but we can also enjoy that space and feed ourselves. That puts the most eyes on it because it's closer to the road. So this becomes an easy access piece, and it'd be right next to that pond. Next. And then this is, you can see the pond in the top corner. That area is talking to the side, but back here, that's about 3 acres in the little outline. There's an image from Pine Bluffs, your day camp kids playing. That space there, hey, it's already a lawn, it's already flat, it's relatively close to the entrance. There's room enough in the wetland beside it to have a decent vegetated buffer between us and the future housing. But that's big enough for some informal play fields. Next. So we've already discussed leaving the driving range parking until you really understand what you want to do with your space. Just beside that, there's this entry drive at the little retaining wall and a little pocket of lawn before we get to trees. It's just the right size and shape for an entry space, maybe some community educational gardens, but also some indoor space, or at least starting out with a pavilion and a maintenance shed. Places where you can sort of organize events around all of these new ecological resources you'd have. Either setting up offices to manage some of these, or sharing management with the golf course, things like booking events. This seemed like a practical spot for that to happen. So that's a suite of different things you could do with this site. These are just our ideas that were sort of mulched up from some of the early discussions. Nothing here is like mandated, but I'm hoping it'll be interesting and cultivate some vision for what you might do. I'll pass that back to you, Pallavi.
Great. Thank you so much, Casey Lee. So definitely a lot of ideas to think about, and the way we wanted to organize, kind of getting feedback from you all for what you just saw, things that really appealed to you, you really liked, or others that maybe weren't that great and you had some concerns about. So we're going to have few breakout rooms so we can give everybody a chance to provide feedback and respond to the ideas that you heard from Casey Lee, or even if you have further questions around what Matt presented for the natural resource inventory. So we'll take about 10 minutes to just have a discussion in smaller groups. We'll have some of the town staff that's going to be in each group facilitating a discussion around what you like and what you didn't, or share any concerns you have. And we'll take some notes. The consultant team will take some notes, and then we'll come back and have a bit of a report out so everybody can hear the discussions that happened in different groups. So with that, I'm seeing someone just joined the meeting, but Kat's gonna put some breakout room invitations out, and hopefully we can all organize and get a nice session of review going. So just, I know there was some good conversation happening in the 3 different rooms, and I'm hoping that whoever was taking notes can do a quick report out, because I think it's really good for us to kind of hear what ideas were discussed in every group. So we can start with group 1.
I can report on that. I took some notes from our group. So overall, folks in group 1 thought it looks fabulous. There were some concerns about the maintenance going forward, about what it's going to cost and staff-wise to maintain a property this large. We talked about how that's something that the community will have to take into consideration when they're making their recommendations on what they like to see here. Obviously, recreational areas have a cost associated with maintenance, where the climate resiliency has less of a cost to maintain going forward. So those are the things that we will have to balance. Folks like the creativity of the different options that were shown, and that it really is beyond the potential of what people thought could take place here. Suggestion was to look for plantings that are more resistant to drought and flooding conditions. The way that climate change has been taking place, we want to keep that into consideration. What the plan is for climate adaptation on the site. And then Alan had a great suggestion. Boxborough just opened a park at Liberty Field and has some great pickleball courts, some active, adult active recreational options that you can do while you're waiting. And Allison had asked when we were getting cut off about the possibility of having a recreational facility or building there. And Allison, yes, that is still on the table. Again, depending on what the needs and the desire of the community is, that could certainly be a possibility there.
Thank you, Denise.
You're welcome.
Who would like to go for group number 2?
I'm happy to report on that.
Thank you, Jackie.
So we had a great conversation about things that we liked. Mostly it was all things that sound good. Marcia had a great point that the maps that were in the presentation that outline the property itself were really helpful for her for context where, these ideas might take place. Heather from ORS had some, great things to say about the idea of managing beavers in a way rather than removing the dams, but to include beaver deceivers and encourage their habitat and all that comes with it. And, positives about all of the habitat benefits of having a rookery and pollinator gardens and the food forest. And also just how recreational day camps could give a lot of educational opportunities for new generations to get excited about this stuff and climate change and learn more about climate change. And then we had a good conversation at the end about what Ann Neal had a great question as her, reporter's hat on. What's the biggest challenge? And Matt had a great answer to that. That, it's very easy to come up with these fabulous ideas, but the hard thing will be how to accomplish them. And perhaps the best way to approach it is to think of things that are easiest to attack first, the low-hanging fruit, but how to determine how to pay for those things, but also what would put the community engagement portion of the project forward, as well as the climate resiliency.
Great. That's amazing. Thank you so much, Jackie. That's really helpful to hear. And I guess group 3, that was us. Valerie, do you want to?
Yes. Thank you. I forgot the number that I was in. So, so a lot of positives from our group as well. A lot of excitement about the different options presented. It seems like the scale of the site really came across. There was, some question about whether this is really a menu of options or do we just get to pick a few? So, again, we talked a little bit more about size of the site and the costs associated with it. We did have some beaver fans in our group as well, so appreciation for letting them do their thing while managing them and working with them. There was also a comment about really needing more spaces for informal play for kids in Stow. So, we do have the Stow Community Park, but really something unscheduled where kids can get off their phones and just be with nature. And then we ended our discussion with kind of a call back to expectations that were set in town meeting discussions. So we had a really useful and interesting exchange between Bob and Mike about, making sure that active recreation really is a core component of this, and specifically climate resilient recreation. And then there's the concern that with the increase in population in Stow in the coming years, we do need to make sure that we're forecasting recreational needs. And so there was a good callback to the planning process around the Stow Community Park. It sounds like there's some good survey examples from that planning process that we could potentially draw from.
Thank you, Valerie. I did want to give an opportunity to Mike since we cut him off. Is there anything else that you wanted to mention, Mike, on this subject?
Nope, everything's good.
Excellent.
And
Thank you.
I just wanted to say that that the balance of everything is what's going to be special about the project, between the active, passive, and just incredible amount of open space. So I think all the right elements are coming together to make this happen.
Great. Thank you for that. I do want to give an opportunity to anybody who was not able to contribute, since we do have 5 minutes. If there are folks who weren't able to give their piece or give their feedback in the smaller groups, if they're, or maybe a reaction to what you heard from the different groups, please turn off your, turn your mic on and speak up. Ingeborg.
Hi,
please.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, good, thanks. I didn't have a chance to say anything. As you know, I do enjoy all the pieces that have been presented, but one question I have is for the technical team in terms of the getting into the more acidic wetland environments. And as you continue to pursue those options, I'd love to know your thoughts on how that would proceed. So that was my only comment. Thank you.
That was one that was sort of tying off at the end of ours as well, and I wanted to add to it. Ingeborg and I have been working together for 18 years, primarily off in wetland restorations for DOTs and for utility companies, but for municipalities, people were being slapped on the wrist and doing the bare minimum to get by. And for the past several years, I've been working with communities who end up being on a grant. So we've got a tiny amount of money and a couple of volunteers, and looking at the way things have been done or are done typically, and what I could do to flip that over and make them work better. So we've been developing guidelines for forest management with MVP, pocket forests, different planting and restoration methodologies for working in the worst sort of environments. You aren't even one of the worst sort of environments, so you've got to step up already. But things like hydroponic jellies, inoculating into our soils from healthy environments, lots of other cool things. And we can kind of share some of those resources as part of a menu. And I would love to have some of you show up as volunteers for some of my events doing these in the near future. So we'll share some of that too.
Great. Definitely enthusiastic for that. So I'm really happy to see that. I know, Kathy, you had to offer some closing remarks, but I did want to remind everybody that we are going to put the survey out, if not tomorrow, day after. And please tell your neighbors, your friends to, give us feedback, at least based on the survey. And then this presentation is also going to be on the website soon. So if anybody missed it, we can definitely share that retroactively. Kathy, please.
Thank you. This was great. I, by quirk of technology, was not able to be in any of the breakout sessions. So Kat and I just sat here like telling pet stories while you guys were talking. And so it was wonderful. I wish I could have recorded each of the breakout sessions so I could listen to them. But thank you, team. It was great to hear the presentation. I think many of us heard a earlier version of this. But it's great to see how your thinking is continuing to evolve. So I think it's really exciting. I wanted to mention just some of the things that are coming up, which is, I know that Pallavi mentioned the survey. We will be posting that on the town website. We'll be getting it out through social media. And there'll also be paper copies as well for people who don't want to take the survey online. It is an anonymous survey. And it asks a lot of questions about what people would like to see at the site going forward. We will be having the Fall Festival at Stow Acres on October 29th, which is a Sunday from 1 to 4. Hopefully folks have heard about that. We have a rain plan given the way things have gone this summer and fall. But it'll be a chance for people to get out on the site. We've got a self-guided tour that will help them kind of navigate some of the features we talked about today. Some of the folks from the team will be also leading other tours, looking at invasives, looking at the driving range. We'll be doing golf cart tours. So it's a chance to really get out on the land and see the property, get a sense of how big it is. And then we'll have tables with ORS and SCT and Rediscover Mapledale and a lot of the local groups all focused around Stow Acres. And then a lot of activities, games, crafts, costume competitions, and food for kids. So definitely try to come out. We look forward to seeing you there. And then we will also be having a dedicated forum, somewhat like this one, for seniors that we're going to be doing at Pompo on November 2nd at 1 p.m. So if folks are interested in attending that, you would be welcome. And it'll be a chance to talk with a different group of folks about what their needs are and what they'd like to see at Stow Acres. That's going to be an in-person session. And then just to mention a couple of other things that are going on, Matt talked earlier about iNaturalist, and we're in the process of setting up an iNaturalist project at Stow Acres so that folks can get out and contribute to it. One of the quirks of iNaturalist is that you have to have 50 sightings before you can set up a project. So I've been out there with my phone, just like mapping everything I can. So I think there's a lot more data points in there for you, Matt. You know, the course is being used for golf, so it's a little tricky to go out there when people are playing golf. But I've found that if you can get out there early in the morning or late in the evening, it is an opportunity to enjoy the property without a lot of other people being out there. You can just park at the driving range and go out. We also have trail cameras positioned around the property, and we've started to collect data on wildlife usage of the property. And Lauren and her students are helping us analyze that data. So that's great. And we'll be moving them around and really trying to understand how wildlife is using the property. And for folks that want to stay in touch with kind of the latest on the project, I mentioned the website. You can subscribe to that page. So if there are updates posted, you'll get a notification about that. And you can also follow us on Facebook, and we always post things about Stow Acres there. We have a dedicated email for folks that want to give us ideas, which is stowacresplan@stowma.gov. So I'll put that in the chat, or maybe Denise can while I'm talking. And last but not least, I would just say, go talk about this project. You know, talk to your friends, talk to your neighbors, talk to your social groups about the project and get them interested. It's really word of mouth that's going to get people excited about this project, and, you know, we'll bring them to future public forums and get them engaged with the project. So you all can help us by being our ambassadors as we move forward. The next public meeting for this project, the official kind of public forum, is probably going to be in January. And it will be once we've gathered all of the public input, the teams had a chance to digest all of that, and we'll put together some concept plans for folks to look at. So we will probably do that in person, and it'll be a chance to really play with some maps and give us some more feedback before we start to put together recommendations. So I think that's all that I have. I don't know, Denise, if you wanted to add anything.
No, I would just say thank you to all who attended tonight. We appreciate you giving up your, some time tonight to hear about this. Obviously, we from the town side are very excited about this project. I've been working on it since the day I arrived in Stow, so it's really exciting to see it come to fruition and go through this planning process with all of you. I'd like to thank those from BSC Group who are here tonight. They are just as engaged in this as we are, so it's really been a fascinating process, and I look forward to seeing it play out over the next few months. And obviously to the staff that are working on this, they have done a tremendous job and are doing the lion's share of the work. So I just want to thank all of you as well. So I hope everyone has a very good night. And I think that's it for us.
And it's 8:30, right on time.
Perfect.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.